Richard Holt's office is on the 42nd floor of a building in downtown Seattle, which tells you everything about the character he has constructed over 3 decades of human residence. The view encompasses the sound, the mountains, the slow commerce of the harbour, a panorama chosen not for beauty but for surveillance, the way all of Zenith's choices are made. You can see a great deal from the 42nd floor. He has always understood that elevation is information. He was aware of the detective before Vael was. That was the oversight function, to know what was approaching before those under observation could react. Mira Santos had been flagged 14 months ago, when her investigation crossed a threshold of proximity to council operations. A researcher whose work gets close to the truth is not unusual. Most close approaches end in retreat, in the absence of confirmable evidence. What was unusual was the quality of her approach, methodical, patient, guided by something the council's behavioral models classified as intuition but which Zenith privately regarded as something less convenient, perception. He had recommended a transfer to another precinct, another city. Human institutions provided mechanisms for this kind of management. Zenith had spent 3 decades learning which levers moved which systems. The transfer was arranged. Then Vael's incident at the river changed the calculus. A detective investigating anomalous child rescues, cross-referencing with a council operative who had just broken the most fundamental rule, the threads were pulling toward each other with an inevitability that administrative solutions could no longer address. Zenith had meetings. Conference calls about mergers that would not occur. Lunch with a senator who considered himself Zenith's close personal friend, and was, in a limited and useful sense, entirely correct. And then, in the 40-minute gap between the senator's departure and his afternoon schedule, he allowed the Richard Holt posture to relax, the performance of age and authority and managed warmth to dissolve, and he stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the sound with eyes that saw it differently than any human eye, reading the water as data rather than beauty. He was at a threshold. The protocol had never been broken. Now it had been. The breach was small: 1 child, 1 act, 1 operative who had lapsed into feeling after 2 centuries of discipline. By any measure of the council's historical precedents, this was manageable. A reassignment. A memory correction, precise rather than violent, the adjustment of a single thread in the fabric of a life, leaving everything else intact. Vael returned to the archive, given a new context, the Daniel Cole identity dissolved and refiled, and the work continued as if the fracture had never been. Except Zenith had been present on this world longer than any current council member, 140 years of observation, which was a different thing from Vael's 2 centuries because the earlier decades had included years when the question of humanity had still been genuinely open. He had voted for the protocol not with the recognition of mathematical truth but with the memory of alternatives considered and rejected for reasons that were, he remained certain, correct. But standing at the window now, he felt something he rarely felt: doubt. Not in the protocol. In the certainty that the protocol could be maintained. Vael was not the first to break. That was what no one in the council said aloud, because the council moved toward truth only when no route around it remained. 3 others in the last 40 years had come close, reassigned before the break occurred, or their lapses small enough to repair without record. The frequency was increasing. That was a data point. Data points, accumulated to sufficient density, become arguments. He called Vael's number. It was a form of the conversation he had been constructing for 20 years, not these exact circumstances, but a conversation that acknowledged what they were both building toward. He said, "We need to speak." Not in convergence. In person. Then Richard Holt straightened his tie and became, again, precisely the man he had built. He picked up a different phone and returned to the afternoon that had been scheduled for him, carrying within himself the weight of a decision that had not yet arrived at its own conclusion.